Good morning, everybody. Scrapple with Grandpa. I want to show everybody what number one copper is, number two copper is, and where you can find more copper. Copper is everywhere. I mean, literally everywhere. You can find it in so many items, it's not even funny. Sometimes, though, copper will, or I should say metal, looks like copper, but it's not. So let's go over a few things that have copper in them, and then we'll go over a few things about what number one is and what number two is. This is a ceiling fan motor. Comes apart pretty easy, actually. Take out a few screws, take the casing apart, you'll find inside copper windings. Basically, like this, okay? Same thing with a washing machine motor. That is a washing machine motor. You will find copper windings inside. It's always going to be number two. This came out of a microwave. You can find lots of copper in microwaves. Some better than others. This particular one has a lot of paper wrapped around it, so I will not tear that thing apart because they can be a pain in the butt. This comes from a squirrel cage fan motor that you might find in a heater of some type. That's going to have generally copper windings in it. Sometimes they can be aluminum, so don't be fooled. Scratch it with a file, whatever you have to do. The big question everybody always has is, what is number one and what is number two? Generally, where I'm at, this is a Romex house wire. You can find Romex everywhere. Although nowadays I have noticed that they're starting to use aluminum wire in house wiring nowadays, which is kind of strange, but they are. They used to use it back in the day. They found it to be corrosive, so they started coating it with copper. It looks like copper, but it's not copper. So the way to tell number one bare bright copper is, this is a pencil lead. And if you notice, these two wires to the left are just slightly smaller than a pencil lead. You can tell it just looking at it, it's slightly smaller. These two pieces are gonna be number two, and you're gonna wanna put them in your number two bucket. Romex wire, house wire, generally would be a little bit bigger than that, like this. And you can tell by looking at that that's about the same size. Both of them pieces came out of Romex. They are about the same size, maybe even slightly bigger than that pencil lead. That is going to be classified as number one bare bright. Put that in your number one pile. In order to get that number one bare bright, inside of your Romex wire is going to be a wire just like that. If you look at that wire is about the same size as pencil lead. So you pull that wire out, it's going to be just like it is, with a piece of paper wrapped around it. And then you're going to find two more wires. There's one right here and this one right here. And in order to get bare bright out of that, you're going to have to strip it with a stripping machine or a knife, or however you do your stripping. That is all going to be bare bright number one if you strip it. Or you can just take the bare bright out and leave the other ones like they are and bring them in as, I think they call it 80%, because there is a pretty good sized wire inside and very little plastic. Like I said, anything smaller than a pencil lead, and even though this is bigger than the pencil lead, the individual strands are what they're talking about. Individual strands. So every individual strand has to be the size of a pencil lead, and as you can see, that is not. So you're going to want to throw that into your number two bin of copper. Let me show you a few examples. This wire, as you can see, is fine thread. You're not going to get the copper recovery from this as much as you would from this. This is my bare bright tile. Most of this, oops, I got a piece in here, number 2. Most of this came from Romex wire or house wire. So I know what it is. You can tell just by the size of it. It's a good size, bigger than pencil lead. And that's what you're gonna want, pencil lead or bigger. If it's smaller than a pencil lead, or I believe what, 14 gauge? 14 gauge. And I don't have a gauge. One day I'm gonna get a gauge that just I can mic it, you know, with a mic gauge or something. I don't have one right now, but you're gonna find this to be, even though there's individual strands, you'll notice that that is definitely bigger or as big as a pencil lead. So this is all gonna be number 1 bare bright. Number 2 copper is, and you still have to take some of the paper off of this. This came out of a motor. This actually came out of a motor like that. Okay, I took it out, I cut it, pulled it out. I'll pull some of the paper off of it. What else is number 2? Number 2 is any pipes that have solder joints on them or paint on them. Now, if I wanted to, I could cut that little piece off and call it number 1 over there. There's probably a lot of copper in here that I could probably cut off and call number 1. So I could literally cut the end of that off and just leave that, and it be number 1 and number 2. This here, it's got a lot of solder joints on it, so they're gonna not be able to claim as much copper out of that because of the slag that they get. Most of these parts here came out of air conditioners, all right? So most of these come from an air conditioner. This is just wire that I stripped, but it's still number 2 because of the fine wire. So anything in this bucket is all gonna be considered number 2 copper. Number 1 copper is, let me get this out of here because it does not belong. It's all wire. I got it in the wrong bucket. That's number 2, number 2, number 2. What you're gonna find for number 1 is any copper that does not have solder joints on it, like this. No solder joints, no paint. It might have some patina on it. I don't know, maybe put a piece of number 2 in here. Some patina on it from just being copper. As long as it doesn't have paint on it, I got a pretty good sized piece here. As long as it does not have, now this here, see, you can't count that as, even though it's pencil lead thick, you can't count it as bare bright because of all the garbage that's on it. So I'm pretty sure, actually, that this should be in my number 2 bucket because it's dirty. It's just very dirty. You tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm gonna throw that in my number 2. Do that in my number 2. But any copper without solder joints is gonna be number 1. That's all number 1. No soldering. Where do you get all this copper? Well, places like this, transformers. This has wire on it. You can take this wire off, cut it, and inside of it, if you cut the ends off, you'll find copper. And that copper is going to be insulated copper. Number 2, insulated, because the wire is very fine. This also came out of the same thing, except for, as much as it looks like copper, don't be mistaken, it's not copper. This is actually aluminum. You can actually tell by the weight. This is another one that came out of the same thing. Okay, came out of one of these. You find these in microwaves a lot and other pieces of equipment. But for number 2, you're gonna get this. Don't mix up your aluminum with your copper. All you have to do is cut it and see the inside is orange, or if you cut it and see that the inside is white, as you can see that is, this is going to be aluminum, this is going to be copper. You might want to clean up some of the strings a little bit. You're going to cut that off because that is going to be classified as number 2 if it's cleaned up a little bit. This, again, is going to be number 2 because of the fine strands, number 2. This is going to be your number 1 because of the big heavy strands. So this is all going to be number 1, number 2. After I strip that, that would be number 2 because of the fine strands. So that's how you determine what kind of copper you have. And you can find copper in so many places. These pieces here came from a air conditioner, as you can see where I cut the pipes off. But inside of that is brass, a lot of brass and copper. So I'm not sure what your yard gives you for that particular stuff, but my yard doesn't pay a whole lot. They're going to call that dirty brass, which dirty brass or irony brass, whatever they're going to call it, doesn't pay a whole lot. So anyway, that's how I determine my my number 1 and my number 2. And I throw it in the appropriate bucket now, believe it or not. I get to finally, since I'm in my shop, throw it in my bucket. Let me show you one more thing. Romax, that's another piece of Romax. There's 3 pieces of number 1 Bear Bright in there after you pull it out. This is actually a dryer cord. And after you open it up, you have your positive, your negative, and your ground. It's all copper, but it's very fine copper. So you're gonna get number 2 for that if you strip it, or you can throw it in there just like that and get, I think they call it 80% recovery because it's single stranded. If you have extension cords, they're gonna call that number 2, let me see, number 2 insulated. So this came from an extension cord, and as you can see, there's 1, 2, 3 separate wires, a piece of paper that runs down in between. This is going to be an extension cord. Therefore, you're not going to get quite the amount of copper recovery as you would in these single strand wires. So you can see that single strand, which I'll just uncoil that. And then you have the one with the coating on it. So this is number 2 insulated wire. Actually, I get 95 cents a pound for that if I bring it in just like that. So extension cords, I cut the ends off. Always have to cut the ends off in order to get number 2 insulated. And I get 95 cents a pound for it. All these wires in this bucket are just single strand insulated wire, but some of it's really thin. Some of it really just doesn't have much in it at all. Like look at that little tiny fine strand in the middle of it. You're gonna get 60% or 55%, I think some people call it. Some people call it 60%. So you get 60% copper recovery there. You'll get, from the single strands, 80% copper recovery there. So that's gonna be worth more money. That's my video, guys. That's my video. I hope that helped you understand what number 1 Bear Bright is and what number 2 copper wire is, because it's very important that you separate your stuff properly before you bring it into your yard, because if you don't, they're not going to separate it for you. And if you have number 1 Bear Bright mixed in with your number 2, they're going to pay you for number 2 on your Bear Bright. Now, if you have Bear Bright in what you're calling number 2, they're going to gladly give you number 2 for it, and get the Bear Bright out of it. Trust me. So separate your copper. Make sure you know what you're bringing in. Just go online, watch videos. There's plenty of videos out there that tell you number 1, number 2. My suggestion would be go to the iScrap, I-S-C-R-A-P, iScrap app. Get the iScrap app, put it on your iPhone or your Android, whatever you have. Check it daily. they have more of a like national or world wide graph for how much you're going to get for your number one, what is number one. So I definitely highly suggest going to the iScrap app and put it on your phone. And every time you want to check out what the cost of something is, open up your app and they will show you, or just go on YouTube and subscribe to their channel. It's an amazing channel. I use it all the time. So anyways, till next time, do what you love and love what you do. I hope you have a good day. It's Sunday. I just wanted to come out here and do a real quick video. I hope it helps. Let me know in the comments.